Hi, it's Robin Gorsline here on Jonathan's Circle, and I'm glad to be with you. And I want to say that many times on this Jonathan's Circle Live, I have spoken of the Eros of God and the body of God. And at the risk of repeating myself, and for the benefit of those who haven't heard me before, I will now indeed repeat myself. I mean by the Eros of God, the body of God, something that's pretty simple for me, though it may not be for others, and has many implications. The body of God is how I refer to what many call the creation, the entire created order, all life forms, not just humans, indeed you and me and every other human being and every creature and object of any sort. It's all God from start to finish, and all of it together makes up God's body. I often use the two terms, the Eros of God and body of God, interchangeably because I find it difficult to separate them. But for our purposes, I will say that the Eros of God is the energy that infuses the body of God. As a queer theologian, it seems clear to me that one cannot have the body without the energy, which is why I so often use them together and interchangeably. Now, the classic definition of Eros is sexual attraction or desire, from the Greek god of the same name, who is called the god of attraction. His Roman counterpart was Cupid, god of desire. And in traditional Christian theology, Eros is only one of the forms of love. Agape is the endless love of God for us, and philia is commonly called brotherly love or love for each other as human beings, and storge is empathy or fellow feeling. But you may be confused by my starting out today by speaking of Eros and body. Isn't our topic today desire? Yes, it is, but for me, desire is always connected to Eros. Sexual desire, yes, but also spiritual desire. And spiritual desire is where I want to focus for the next few minutes. Indeed, I believe God is the source of our desire, not only for sex, but for objects and subjects of our life-affirming, loving, caring, compassionate desires. I want to be clear that God is not the source of our desires for revenge or retribution or domination or greed or violence. I'll come back to that important point a little later. This may be the moment also to speak briefly of the concept of God's will. I have been involved in a 12-step program for many years. In step 11, we pray, quote, only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out, unquote. Now, when it's my turn to read that step as we go around in a meeting, I read it aloud just the way it's written. But when I say, from my own experience, when I talk for myself, I say, I don't believe that God wills us. Instead, I say, God desires us, has desire for us, even multiple desires for us. In my experience, God's mode of helping me be me is through desire. I often say that my image of God is a being I can feel, if not see, over my left shoulder, jumping up and down, waving the divine arms to get my attention. Of course, most of the time I ignore God's attempts to connect with me. But that does not stop God from desiring me. Indeed, desiring contact with us, fomenting desire for us to be all we can be. In my experience, God never gives up. In that sense, desire is the root of all life. It is vital, of course, that we overcome historical and contemporary sex negativity by embracing sexual desire as central to our individual and collective, our global well-being. But desire is more than sexual. When I say desire is the root of all life, I mean all life, not just human life, but the entire creation, the whole body of God. I see desire in trees, the intrepid way a seed or acorn falls in the forest and sprouts and begins forming a tree, growing a tree that can reach toward the sky, withstanding pests, weather challenges, and certainly human environmental degradation, to grow sometimes, in some cases, tall and straight for 60 to 100 feet or more in the air. And I see desire when, as I sit in my study at home writing each day, I experience and I see desire when our dog Coco comes to me at some point, sticking his snout in my lap, wanting my attention. Indeed, I've come to believe, I think really understand, based on experience, that Coco's action is a signal from God for me to pause, quieting myself and focusing entirely on Coco in order to feel God's presence. If all this sounds too woo-woo to you, I understand. I've thought that sometimes myself. But my understanding of desire was radically upended during a vision quest in Yosemite National Park in which I participated about 5 years ago. As I sat alone and naked on a large boulder, gazing at the landscape, especially focused on one scraggly pine growing out of the granite, just letting my mind wander and occasionally writing a phrase or observation in my journal, I heard a very clear voice say, "And the writing keeps crying out." At the very same moment, I wrote that phrase down in my journal. It was as if the writing was being dictated, not by me. I've come to understand that in that moment I received a message of God's desire. Thus my desire to take up writing as a vocation rather than as a byproduct of my serving as a pastor or a nonprofit executive or any of the other work I've done in my life. My life was changed that day, and in the days and years since I have made and continue to make changes in my life to put writing at the center of my life. On that same vision quest, one day earlier, I had heard what felt like voices, multiple voices. I believe they were the trees saying, "We have missed you. We have missed you." This is part of the reason I now write poems about trees and consider trees to be my totems, both certain individual trees I encounter at different moments and trees in general. In all this, I experience desire to connect with other beings, both human and not, and certainly God, and to connect with myself in deeper ways than ever before in my life. I wish I could tell you that God and I are constantly swapping desires, that I'm open all or even most or much of the time to God's desires as they are embodied in my consciousness, my life, even my unconscious. But it is not so. And this is where the desire I spoke of earlier comes in, the kinds of what we often call desires, or perhaps they're only wants or things we define as needs. Desire that is not life-affirming, not loving, not caring, not compassionate, not just. I've used the word desire for these negative attitudes and behaviors, but I really understand them as anti-desire. They can be whims or wishes or bloodlust or coveting. They can be giving into anger and resentment, seeking selfish or self-serving privilege or domination or advantage over others without regard to their needs, their desires for wholeness and well-being. These attitudes and behaviors get in the way of true desire, God's desire, my own desire for personal wholeness and the wholeness of the entire body of God. Now, as I close, I want to say that preparing these remarks has been both very challenging and rewarding for me. I feel like I'm out on a metaphysical limb, not sure if I will fall or not. Now, this may have something to do with an incident in my life many years ago when, as a PhD student in systematic theology, I delivered a paper at a large and prestigious academic gathering in which I spoke of desire as a theological category. When I finished, my advisor, a man I deeply respected and still do and loved and still love, as well as others in the audience who were and are respected theologians more senior than I and all good people, They all reacted angrily, saying in various ways I was dead wrong about desire being a theological category. I can still hear one voice saying, desire is the very antithesis of a theological category or concept. Of course, I was stung at the time and scared, and I retreated. But over the course of 20 or 25 years since that incident, I've come to understand that their reactions stem from a belief that theological study and discourse is a mental activity without serious or fundamental connection to our bodies, our embodiment. Now I know that theology without bodies is like desire without God, and neither are for me.